William Robertson Smith FRSE was a Scottish Orientalist, Old Testament scholar, professor of divinity, and minister of the Free Church of Scotland. He was an editor of the Encyclopædia Britannica and contributor to the Encyclopædia Biblica. He is also known for his book Religion of the Semites, which is considered a foundational text in the comparative study of religion, life and career. Smith was born in Aberdeenshire and demonstrated a quick intellect at an early age. He entered Aberdeen University at 15, before transferring to New College, Edinburgh, to train for the ministry. In 1866, after graduation he took up a chair in Hebrew at the Aberdeen Free Church College in 1870. In 1875 he wrote a number of important articles on religious topics in the 9th edition of the Encyclopædia Britannica. He became popularly known because of his trial for heresy in the 1870s, following the publication of an article in the Encyclopædia Britannica. Smith's articles approached religious topics without endorsing the Bible as literally true. The result was a furore in the Free Church of Scotland, of which he was a member. As a result of the heresy trial, he lost his position at the Aberdeen Free Church College in 1881 and took up a position as a reader in Arabic at the University of Cambridge, where he eventually rose to the position of university librarian, professor of Arabic and a Fellow of Christ's College. It was during this time that he wrote the Old Testament in the Jewish Church and the Prophets of Israel, which were intended to be theological treatises for the lay audience. In 1887 Smith became the editor of the Encyclopædia Britannica after the death of his employer Thomas Spencer Baines left the position vacant. In 1889 he wrote his most important work, Religion of the Semites, an account of ancient Jewish religious life which pioneered the use of sociology in the analysis of religious phenomena. He was professor of Arabic with the full title Sir Thomas Adams Professor of Arabic. He died in 1894 of tuberculosis. Approach. His views on the historical method of criticism can be illustrated in the following quote: "Ancient books coming down to us from a period many centuries before the invention of printing have necessarily undergone many vicissitudes. Some of them are preserved only in imperfect copies made by an ignorant scribe of the Dark Ages. Others have been disfigured by editors who mixed up foreign matter with the original text. Very often an important book fell altogether out of sight for a long time, and when it came to light again all knowledge of its origin was gone, for old books did not generally have title pages and prefaces, and when such a nameless roll was again brought into notice, some half-informed reader or transcriber was not unlikely to give it a new title of his own devising, which was handed down thereafter as if it had been original. Or again, the true meaning and purpose of a book often became obscure in the lapse of centuries, and led to false interpretations. Once more, antiquity has handed down to us many writings which are sheer forgeries, like some of the apocryphal books, or the Sibylline oracles, or those famous epistles of Phalaris which formed the subject of Bentley's great critical essay. In all such cases the historical critic must destroy the received view in order to establish the truth. He must review doubtful titles, purge out interpolations, expose forgeries, but he does so only to manifest the truth, and exhibit the genuine remains of antiquity in the real character. A book that is really old and really valuable has nothing to fear from the critic, whose labors can only put its worth in a clearer light, and establish its authority on a surer basis. Published works. Among his writings of the following books: annotated The Old Testament in the Jewish Church, The Old Testament in the Jewish Church, A Course of Lectures on Biblical Criticism, 2nd edition. The author addresses the Christian believer who opposes higher criticism of the Old Testament. considering that it will reduce the Bible to rational historical terms and omit the supernatural. He replies that the Bible's purpose is to give its readers entry into the experience of lived faith, to put them in touch with God working in history, which a true understanding of the text will better provide. Critical Bible study, in fact, follows in the spirit of the Protestant Reformation. Prior Catholic study of the Bible is faulted for being primarily interested in drawing out consistent doctrines. Instead, Protestants initially turned to Jewish scholars who could better teach them Hebrew. However, the chief purpose of Jewish learning was legal, the Bible being a source of Jewish law, derived to settle the current disputes and issues of practice. As Protestant Bible study continued, the nature of the text began to reveal itself as complex and many-layered. For example, especially in the earlier books, two different, redundant, and sometimes inconsistent versions appeared to coexist. This would imply that an editor had woven several pre-existing narratives together to form a composite text. The Psalms are shown to reflect the life of the entire Hebrew people, rather than that of a single traditional author, King David. Prior understanding was that all ritual and civil law in the Pentateuch had originated at Mount Sinai, Bible history being the story of how the Hebrews would follow and not a comprehensive moral order. Yet from the Bible text, the author demonstrates how ritual law was initially ignored after Moses. Only much later, following the return from exile, was the ritual system established under Ezra. The Pentateuch contains laws and history. Its history does not profess to be written by Moses, as he himself is habitually spoken of in the third person. From internal evidence found in the Bible, Pentateuch history was written in the land of Canaan after the death of Moses, probably as late as the period of Kings, perhaps written under Saul or under David. The laws found in the book of Deuteronomy are also demonstrated to date to a time long after Moses. In fact, everything in the reforms under King Josiah are found written in the Deuteronomic Code. His Book of the Covenant probably is none other than the Law of Deuteronomy, which, in its very form, appears to have once been a separate volume. Internal evidence found in the Bible is discussed. In the centuries immediately following Moses, the Pentateuch was not the primary rule, rather divine spiritual guidance was provided to the ancient Hebrew nation by the prophets. Smith's lectures were originally given in Edinburgh and Glasgow during early 1881. It is of the first importance for the reader to realize that biblical criticism is not the invention of modern scholars, but the legitimate interpretation of historical facts. The result is that the history of Israel, one of the strongest evidences of Christianity, Doctrinal opposition against Smith first arose after his 1875 Encyclopaedia article, Bible, which covered similar ground. In 1878 church heresy charges had been filed, the chief of which concerned the authorship of Deuteronomy. These 1881 lectures followed his removal as professor at the Free Church College in Aberdeen. Smith's 1881 edition was a landmark in the history of biblical criticism in Britain, in particular because it laid before the general public the critical view to which Wellhausen had given classical expression in his Geschichte Israels, which had appeared less than 3 years earlier, in 1878. Yet Smith did not merely repeat the arguments of Wellhausen or anyone else, he approached the subject in a quite original way. The prophets of Israel and the place in history, to the close of the 8th century B.C., reprinted with introduction and notes by T.K. Cheney. The Hebrew prophets are presented in context with the ancient religious practice by neighboring nations, instead of divination elsewhere often used for political convenience or emotional release. Here the prophets of Israel witness to the God of justice, to the God's true nature. In announcing ethical guidance, these ancient prophets declared to the Jewish people the will of the God acting in history. The opening chapters introduce the nature of Jehovah in Jewish history after Moses discussing neighboring religions, regional theocracy, henotheism, national survival and righteousness, as well as Judges, and the prophet Elijah. Then follows chapters on the prophets Amos, Hosea, and Isaiah, wherein Smith seeks to demonstrate how the Hebrew religion grew through each prophet's message. The work concludes with the secular and religious history of the period preceding the exile. In his preface, the author acknowledges reliance on critical biblical studies, specifically that established by Aval, developed by Graf, and furthered by Kuhn, and referencing his Gottesdienst by Doom per his Theologie der Propheten, and by Wellhausen, citing his Geschichte. The author confidently rests the case for biblical religion on ordinary methods of historical investigation, and on the general law of human history that truth is consistent, progressive, and imperishable, while every falsehood is self-contradictory, and ultimately falls to pieces. A religion which has endured every possible trial declares itself by irresistible evidence to be a thing of reality and power. Kinship and marriage in early Arabia. Kinship and marriage in early Arabia, 2nd edition, with additional notes by the author and by Professor Ignaz Goldziher, Budapest, and edited with an introduction by Stanley A. Cook, reprint 1963, Beacon Press, Boston, with a new preface by E. L. Peters. This work traces, from an earlier totemist matriarchy that practiced exogamy, the further development of a system of male kinship, with corresponding laws of marriage and tribal organization, which prevailed in Arabia at the time of Muhammad. Chapters 1. The theory of the genealogists as to the origin of Arabic tribal groups, e.g., Bakr and Talib, fictitious ancestors, unity of the tribal blood, female eponyms. 2. The kindred group and its dependents and allies, e.g., adoption, blood covenant, property, tribe and family. 3. The homogeneity of the kindred group in relation to the law of marriage and descent, e.g., exogamy, types of marriage, inheritance, divorce, women's property. 4. Paternity, e.g., original sense of fatherhood, polyandry, infanticide. 5. Paternity, polyandry with male kinship, and with kinship through women, e.g., evidence of Strabo, conjugal fidelity, chastity, milk brotherhood. 2 systems of kinship, decay of tribal feeling. 6. Female kinship and marriage bars, e.g., forbidden degrees, the tent in marriage, matronymic families, bina marriages, Baal marriage, totemism and heterogeneous groups. 7. Totemism, e.g., tribes named from animals, jinn, tribal marks are WASM. 8. Conclusion, e.g., origin of the tribal system, migrations of the Semites, conceived at the frontier of academic study and early culture. Smith's work relied on a current anthropology proposed by the late John Ferguson McLennan in his Primitive Marriage. Smith also employed recent material by A. G. Wilkin, Het Matriarchaat Bijdraude Arabieren, and by E. B. Tyler, Arabian Matriarchate, and received suggestions from Theodore Noldake and from Ignaz Goldziher. Although still admired on several counts, the scholarly consensus now disfavors many of its conclusions. Smith here forced the facts to fit McLennan's evolutionary schema, which was entirely defective. Professor Edward Evans Pritchard, while praising Smith for his discussion of the tribe, finds his theories about an early matriarchy wanting. Smith conceived feminine names for tribes as survivals of matriarchy, but they may merely reflect grammar, i.e., collective terms in Arabic are constantly feminine, or lineage practice, i.e., in a polygamous society the children of one father may be distinguished into groups by use of the mother's names. Evans Pritchard also concludes that Smith makes out no case for the ancient Bedouin being totemic, but only for their interest in nature. He faults Smith for his blind acceptance of McLennan's formulations. Smith was part of a general movement by historians, anthropologists, and others, that both theorized a matriarchy present in early civilizations and discovered traces of it. In the 19th century it included eminent scholars and well-known authors such as J. Bachofen, James George Fraser, Frederick Engels, and in the 20th century Robert Graves, Carl Jung, Joseph Campbell, Maria Gimbutas. Smith's conclusions were based on the then prevailing notion that matrifocal and matrilineal societies were the norm in Europe and Western Asia, at least prior to the invasion of the Indo-Europeans from Central Asia. Subsequent findings have not been kind to that thread of Smith's work which offers a prehistoric matriarchy to schematize the Semites. It is certainly recognized that the large number of prehistoric hunter-gatherer cultures practiced matrilinear cognatic succession, as do many hunter-gatherer cultures today. Yet it is no longer widely accepted by scholars that the earliest Semites had a matrilineal system. This is due largely to the unearthing of thousands of Safetic inscriptions in pre-Islamic Arabia, which appear to indicate that, on the issues of inheritance, succession, and political power, the Arabs of the pre-Islamic period were little different from the Arabs today. Evidence from both Arab and Amorite sources discloses the early Semitic family as being mainly patriarchal and patrilineal, as of the Bedouin today, while the early Indo-European family may have been matrilineal, or at least allotting high social status to women. Robert G. Hoyland, a scholar of the Arabs and Islam, writes, while descent through the male line would seem to have been the norm in pre-Islamic Arabia, we are occasionally given hints of matrilineal arrangements. The Religion of the Semites, Lectures on the Religion of the Semites, Fundamental Institutions, First Series, Second Edition, edited by J. S. Black, reprint 1956 by Meridian Library, New York, Third Edition, introduced and additional notes by S. A. Cook, reprint 1969 by KTAV, New York, with prolegomena by James Muhlenberg. This well-known work seeks to reconstruct from scattered documents the several common religious practices and associated social behavior of the ancient Semitic peoples, i.e., of Mesopotamia, Syria, Phoenicia, Israel, Arabia. The book thus provides the contemporary historical context for the earlier biblical writings. In 2 introductory lectures the author discusses primal religion and its evolution, which now seem too often to over-generalize. In the first, Smith notes with caution the cuneiform records of Babylon, and the influence of ancient Egypt, then mentions pre-Islamic Arabia and the Hebrew Bible. He discounts any possibility of a complete comparative religion of Semitic religions. In the second lecture, Smith's comments range widely on various facets of primal religion in Semitic society, e.g., on the protected strangers who were personally free but had no political rights. Smith continues that as the tribe protects the god, so does the god protect the tribe as clients who obey and so are righteous. Hence the tribal god God may develop into a universal deity whose worshippers follow ethical precepts. Of the 11 lectures, holy places are discussed in lectures 3 to V. In the third lecture, nature gods of the land are discussed. Later jinn and the haunts are investigated, wherein the nature of totems are introduced. Then totem animals are linked to jinn, and the totem to the tribal god. The fourth lecture discusses e.g. the holiness and the taboos of the sanctuary. The fifth, holy waters, trees, caves, and stones. Sacrifices are addressed in lectures Vita. The sixth contains Smith's controversial theory of communal sacrifice regarding the totem, wherein the tribe, at a collective meal of the totem animal, come to realize together a social bond together with the totem-linked tribal god. This communion theory, shared in some regard with Wellhausen, now enjoys little strong support. On the cutting edge of biblical scholarship, this work builds on a narrower study by his friend Professor Julius Wellhausen, Rest Arabisque and Hydentums, and on other works on the religious history of the region and in general. The author also employs analogies drawn from James George Frazer, to apply where insufficient data existed for the ancient Semites. Hence Smith's methodology was soon criticized by Theodore Noldake. Generally, the book was well received by contemporaries. It won Wellhausen's praise. Later it would influence Emil Durkheim, Misha Eliade, James George Frazer, Sigmund Freud, and Bronislaw Malinowski. After 75 years, Evans Pritchard, although noting his wide influence, summarized criticism of Smith's totemism bluntly. All Robertson Smith really does is to guess about a period of Semitic history about which we know almost nothing. The Religion of the Semites. Lectures on the Religion of the Semites. Second and third series, edited with an introduction by John Day, based on the newly discovered original lecture notes of William Robertson Smith. Only the first series had been prepared for publication by the author. Smith earlier had written that 3 courses of lectures were planned. The first regarding practical religious institutions, the second on the gods of Semitic heathenism, with the third focusing on the influence of Semitic monotheism. Yet because the first course of lectures did not finish, it left coverage of feasts and the priesthood to run over into the second course. Second series, I. Feasts. 2. Priests and the priestly oracles. 3. Diviners and prophets. Third series, I. Semitic polytheism. 2. Semitic polytheism. 3. The Gods and the World. Cosmogony. An appendix contains contemporary press reports describing the lectures, including reports of extemporaneous comments made by Robertson Smith, which appear in neither of the 2 published texts derived from his lecture notes. Other writings. Articles in the Encyclopædia Britannica 24 volumes, which include Angel 2, Bible 3, Chronicles, books of V. David, Vi, Decalogue 7, Hebrew language and literature, She, Hosea 12, Jerusalem 13, Mecca and Amt Medina 15, Messiah 16, Paradise 18, Priests and Amt Prophet 19, Psalms, Book of XX, Sacrifice 21, Temple and Amt Tithes 23. Lectures and Essays, edited by J. S. Black and G. W. Crystal. I. Scientific papers, 5 papers including On the Flow of Electricity in Conducting Surfaces. 2. Early theological essays, 4 essays including Christianity and the Supernatural, and The Question of Prophecy in the Critical Schools of the Continent. 3. Early Aberdeen lectures, 5 lectures including What History Teaches Us to Seek in the Bible, and The Fulfillment of Prophecy. IV. Later Aberdeen lectures, 4 lectures including On the Study of the Old Testament in 1876, and On the Poetry of the Old Testament. v. Arabian Studies. 2 Studies, Animal Tribes in the Old Testament. A Journey in the Hejaz. vi. Reviews of books. 2 Reviews, Wellhausen's Geschichte Israels, Renan's Histoire du Peuple d'Israël. Preface to Julius Wellhausen, Prolegomena to the History of Israel, Transil. By J. S. Blackernamp, A. Menzies at VX. Review of Rudolf Kittel, Geschichte.He. 2 in the English Historical Review 8-314-316. Heresy Trial Documents. The Presbytery's Prosecution. Free Church of Scotland. Presbytery of Aberdeen. The Libel against Professor William Robertson Smith. Smith's Answers and Letter. Answer to the form of libel. Additional answer to the libel. Answer to the amended libel. An open letter to Principal Rainey. Commentary on Smith, E. G. Brown. Obituary Notice. Professor William Robertson Smith, 12 pages. John Sutherland Blackernamp, George Crystal, The Life of William Robertson Smith. Ronald Roy Nelson, The Life and Thought of William Robertson Smith, 1846–1894. T. Obedelman, W. Robertson Smith and the Sociological Study of Religion. Edward Evans Pritchard, A History of Anthropological Thought, Chap. 8. Robertson Smith, at 69–81. Richard Allen Reason, Criticism and Faith in Late Victorian Scotland, A. B. Davidson, William Robertson Smith, and George Adam Smith. William Johnston, Editor. William Robertson Smith, Essays in Reassessment. Gillian M. Bediako, Primal Religion and the Bible, William Robertson Smith and His Heritage. John William Rogerson, The Bible and Criticism in Victorian Britain, Profiles of F. D. Morrison. William Robertson Smith. Bernhard Meyer, William Robertson Smith. His Life, His Work, and His Times. John Buchan, The Kirk in Scotland. Hodder and Stoughton Limited, Edinburgh.